Hello everybody, welcome to episode 194 of Shelf Viewer. Today we'll be going over the 2003 film entitled Identity. Now I'm really surprised I haven't made more videos on movies because movies have always been a massive part of my life because they're actually one of the main ways that I really connected with my dad because we both love movies, and I'm surprised that, like I said, that I haven't made more videos on it. Like, I believe the only movie I made a video on is The Backrooms. That's because I watched it in theaters. So yeah, I also haven't watched a lot of movies recently because I've just, for like the last 3 years since I started watching anime, I've predominantly just watched anime. But yeah, so I was getting a little bored because I was like, you know what, I'm getting a little bit fatigued of Inuyasha. Yes, I do really enjoy Inuyasha, but I've been watching it for like over 100 episodes straight, so I wanted a little bit of a break from it. So I decided to go to my watch list, my very extensive watch list, and select the first thing that was on top, and it was Identity. And I'm certainly glad that I did, because Identity is a very special movie. It is most certainly something that I haven't really seen before. Now, yes, well, actually, before I spoil it, I'll describe the story. So, we are introduced into this world where, actually, the first couple of scenes describe the kills of this serial killer by the name of Malcolm Rivers. And then we end up getting thrown into the actual story. And with this story, we see as a, well, we kind of see as everyone eventually comes to be at a motel. So, first, we see as this car ultimately ends up hitting this woman on the side of the road who was with her family. Her name is Alice York, and she has a young son by the name of Timothy, and her husband, his name is George. And they were going out of town to essentially take Timothy to a new good school, a school of higher quality. And George is actually Timothy's stepfather rather than his actual father, because his actual father had a bad temper, and ultimately he didn't, but his wife ended up divorcing him. And so we see ultimately as the tire ends up going out on this rainy night, and George goes up to fix it. And while fixing it, we see also as Alice comes out of the car, and she's kind of interacting with Timothy while he's on the inside. And at one point, she backs up into the road, and she is hit by a car. Now, within this car, we see as our main protagonist, Ed, is driving it for this actress by the name of Carolina. Now, Carolina is obviously she is a very stereotypical actress. She is very self-centered and, I guess, kind of just a douchebag. But yeah, so we see ultimately as Ed ends up hitting this woman, and he ends up getting out taking responsibility, though Carolina is like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. But ultimately we see as they then find a motel, end up taking Alice to it, where they end up laying her in bed, and go and search out for a way to get to the ambulance, because they don't have good service here, nor is there another battery for Carolina's phone. So we see as Ed goes looking out, ultimately he ends up running out on another person who's been stranded out in this massive rain because of the flooding, and her name is Paris. Now, she is a woman of the night, to put it lightly, a euphemism for you. But, yeah. So Odell ends up finding her, taking her in, not with any, I guess, nefarious reason, just because she was out there stranded. And then we see as they also run into this pair, or couple, whose names are Jenny and Lou, short for Louisiana. And so we see as they end up joining them as well, head back to the motel, and everyone kind of starts converging here. Now, during this time, we see as they're trying to figure out a way to essentially help Alice, who has been hit. And also these other people are just trying to come here to stay because it's obviously raining and it's very difficult to go out elsewhere to kind of go any further, since everywhere is essentially flooded. And so we see as Ed ultimately ends up employing some stitching work because he is a ex-police officer, but now he's essentially a chauffeur for Carolina. And we see ultimately as he is able to stitch up the wound on Alice. And this seems that everything's going to be good. We also see now as a police cruiser ends up pulling up, and in this police cruiser, we are introduced to the officer by the name of Rhodes, and he has a convict with him, a very nefarious convict who is apparently homicidal. And so we see as he ends up asking the motel manager by the name of Larry where he can put him, and ultimately he's like, you know what, they got a good bathroom in here, so you can attach him to that. So, we see as all this continues to play out, and stuff starts to settle down. Nothing is really going crazy anymore. We see as they're trying to just watch over Alice, make sure she remains stable and all of that, and kind of wait out the storm so that they can eventually end up getting her to a place of security and well-being so that she can be healed. And during this, we see as the night ends up passing, and then we fall into our murder mystery plot, which isn't really important to the story, but since it's not really the most interesting part, but we see as this starts to devolve. We actually see as Carolina is killed first, and Ed ends up waking up, and he wakes up because he hears something going on in the laundromat. He ends up by himself sneaking into the laundromat, and he opens up the washing machine and sees that Carolina is in there with her head and all, because she did scream as well, and this led to Ed being woken up as well. But yeah, so we see this, then, what's his name? Rhodes come in, they start investigating, because they're both, well, Ed is an ex-police officer, and Rhodes is a police officer. So we see this, they start investigating, they start alerting everyone, yo, Carolina has been killed, and everything kind of starts getting a little bit shifty from here. We see as everyone kind of starts freaking out. We see also as Larry ends up sneaking into Carolina's room to steal her wallet, which is very suspicious. And during this time, we also see as this is actually before the murder. We see as Rhodes interacts with what's her name, Paris. And during this time, while he left his room, we also had to see that he had blood on his back, on the back of his shirt, which is very odd. And with that, we get to see, I was thinking of another thing. We also see how Larry interacts with Paris. He does not like Paris because he notices and deduces that she is, in fact, a woman of the night. And so this kind of starts to play out. And we see then, as like I said, everyone starts to freak out. We see as Ginny and Lou get into an argument. And after this, we see as they end up running to a separate room, though there is a supposed killer out on the loose, since they also searched and went back to where the convict had been stored, and he got out. So they're presuming that the convict is out killing people. So they try and centralize everyone, but Lou and Ginny ultimately end up getting into an argument because they've only been married for a couple of hours, and they got married because Ginny was supposedly pregnant. However, Ginny ends up complaining that she was in fact not pregnant, and she just did it to get Lou to marry her because apparently Lou had been, how do I say this, going around town. And so we see they get an argument, and Lou is trying to Ginny ultimately ends up locking herself in the bathroom because she's scared that Lou is going to hurt her. And we see as he starts banging on the door and all of that. And ultimately we see then as his bang stops for a second, and then he comes back, starts banging again, and screaming and all of that, but ultimately that goes kaput eventually. So we see then as Ginny ultimately ends up opening the door to see Lou's corpse laying on the wall. And now we first notice here that someone has left a key by Lou's corpse. And this makes it seem as if Larry may be doing this. So we have our first suspicions of Larry here. And after this, we then see as, what do I want to say? They go and look at, what's her name's corpse, Carolina's corpse once more. And it has a key on it as well. So everything seems to be pretty suspiciously pointing towards Larry at this point. We also see now as Ed starts to go and investigate around. He ends up going to the camper where Larry resides, and he finds a bunch of scandalous magazines. And so we see he also sees drawings in these which have some of the women with drawn in cut throats that say something along the lines of, "This woman of the night needs to die, women of the night need to die." And this makes it seem as if Larry has a prejudice against women of the night, but why would he kill these random people essentially if they weren't of such a caliber or such an occupation? So we see all this continue to play out, and this ultimately ends up progressing, and we get to the point where everyone starts suspecting Larry, kind of. But ultimately, Ed and Rhodes are able to find the convict. So they're like, yo, okay, we found the convict, and we've captured him. So he is the one who's been killing. And so ultimately, they end up tying him up, and they put Larry on watch duty for him. And so we then see as Larry and the convict have a brief interaction where the convict keeps asking Larry, what's in your fridge over there? And Larry starts kind of freaking out about this. So we can presume, yo, there's probably a body in there. And so we then don't see Larry for a time. We then see it as Rhodes and Ed are searching about still, and then ultimately they end up saying that Larry had went back to his office to get something. Like, yo, Larry, what are you doing? The convict's in there. And they ultimately end up heading back to the convict, but they see that he has a baseball bat stuck down his throat, dead. Someone has killed him. And it makes it look like, yo, Larry has done this. And so everyone starts freaking out. They try and get Larry, but ultimately Paris ends up pulling up, gets taken hostage with a knife to her throat for a time, but they are able to get her back. And then they end up capturing Larry, and Larry's vehemently denying. He's like, I did not kill them. I did not kill them at all. And we also see as during this time when after Ginny got free, they ended up opening the freezer and a body fell out. So it's looking very much so like Larry did all this. And so they see as they ultimately end up capturing him, and they are all starting kind of freaking out and all that. But ultimately, before he can be completely captured, he ends up running off, and he is able to get the keys to the truck, which he ends up cranking, driving. And in his pursuit to drive, he does not get very far because he runs into George, who is Timothy's father, and blasts him into a wall where he dies. Then they ultimately end up getting Larry out, tying him up and all of that. So after this, we see as things kind of continue to go downhill. We see then as ultimately, what's her name? Alice also ends up dying because of her wounds, but it's not actually because of her wounds, as we learn later on. But I won't spoil that yet. So we see this, and so she is dead now, but what's very suspicious is we see as Rhodes finds a key beneath her, which is very startling, and they ultimately end up going back and searching George's body, where they find a key as well. So they realize that, yo, people are slowly deducing down the numbers, And this is getting bad because we're slowly going to die. And we also see here as Ginny ends up suggesting, yo, maybe it's not a killer because the convict is dead now and Larry wasn't. Larry is tied down here and Larry doesn't really seem suspicious. So we are not going to believe that Larry is the killer, and we're going to believe that he is, in fact, telling the truth when he says, yo, I didn't kill these people. And so we then see as they see as Ginny ends up telling a story about how this motel is built on a Navajo tribe where they all ended up dying. Well, not a Navajo tribe, like Navajo burial ground where they all died of thirst because the U.S. pushed them off their land. So like, ooh, no, supernatural stuff. And at this point in the movie, I was kind of mad because I was like, oh, we're going to a supernatural thing here. I'm not much liking this. So we then see this continues to play out. And ultimately, we then see as Timothy and Ginny are sent off because they're like, yo, we don't want you here anymore because you'll be safer if you go elsewhere. And when they go to crank the car blows up, they both die. And apparently they got completely vaporized because Ginny is not in there, nor is Timothy, and they can't even find the key in there. So then everything just apparently seems to be going worse and worse. We then see as they kind of start talking all that, and ultimately they end up letting Larry out because Larry obviously has not been killing people, and Larry ends up not escaping, but being freed. They kind of start freaking out. They're kind of figuring out what's going on here. And so we see as they start searching about, and ultimately they start discussing possibilities of what has connected them because they think that in some occult stuff that a connection has made all of them reside in this area and slowly be killed off. So they ultimately end up revealing that, yo, everyone's birthday is on May 10th, which is very suspicious. And they go and end up searching all of the IDs that they had to provide for the motel and like just to get a room. And Larry ends up saying, yo, they were all born on May 10th. And then after this, we also see as Ed is continuing his investigation. And in this, we see as he goes about and figures out, yo, all these people's names have a connection to a state somehow. His name is Ed Dakota. Rhodes' name, obviously, Rhode Island. Larry's name, I think, is like, crap, I can't even remember what his name is. But Paris' name is Paris, Nevada. Alice, York. George, York. Carolina. Louisiana. Jenny's name was short for Virginia. So we see all this, and ultimately we then end up swapping back to the other world, where we see as the supposed killer, Malcolm Rivers, is being put on a retrial because they believe that they can prove that he is, in fact, in a poor mental state with DID, or dissociative identity disorder, and that if he is in this state, then they should not execute him because he is not in his right state of mind and he cannot know why he is being executed. And we then go back to this world where we see as he's pulled in here, and it appears to be Ed. Now, Ed is like, whoa, what's going on here? And they're talking with him. They're like, yo, we have seen you transform through multiple personalities here, and specifically 10 personalities, which is kind of like the number of the people there. And we see as they ultimately explain to us, but Ed obviously is denying this, but he's swapping between Ed and Malcolm. Well, not necessarily swapping between Ed and Malcolm, but he's like, no, and we see as the doctor ends up revealing to him that, yo, yeah, you're in fact Malcolm Rivers, and you committed 6 murders. And what we need you to do is we need you to make sure that the murderer personality does not live, because we've seen you swap through all these personalities. So this was super cool because this actually made the movie interesting, and it's not just some supernatural stuff. It is in fact all going on in Malcolm Rivers' mind where he is killing off his personalities, which is super cool. And they've spectated this from their little essentially like mini jury because it's late at night and they're all here on essentially urgent call, urgent appeal. And with this, we see then as he ends up going back to the persona of Ed Rivers. And with this, we see as then we find as Jenny ultimately ends up going to look for a truck to kind of get away from here. And, crap, what was it that she said originally? Oh yeah, what I forgot to mention, but what made them actually figure out about the birthdays was she hollered out of the door once everyone was kind of starting to more and more die off. She was like, I don't want to do this anymore. My birthday's next week. I'm going to be 30. I just want to own an orange grove. And we then see as everyone's like, yo, hold up. My birthday's on that day too. And so made him go and search for all that. But back in this day, we see as Jenny ultimately ends up running up on the cop car because she gets a little suspicious. And with this, we see as she ends up opening up the bag and finding that, in fact, Rhodes is not, well, she found papers of him, and she then opens the bag. And Rhodes is, in fact, not a police officer. He is a convict, and he actually was able to kill his driver while being transported. Him and the other convict escaped via this manner. And so then she ends up kind of calling for Larry silently. She's like, Larry. But ultimately, Larry is not able to escape Rhodes' wrath. She's like, you need to get the truck keys, but ultimately Rhodes ends up getting him, searches down Jenny, and tries to plan on killing her, but ultimately Ed ends up finding him, and Jenny's able to escape. And ultimately, Ed runs into Jenny, and Jenny's like, he tells Jenny, yo, you need to stay here. So Ed goes down, hunts down Rhodes, And they both had a standoff, killing each other. And then we see as Jenny tries to resuscitate Ed, but Ed is ultimately unresponsive to this and dies. So from this, we presume, everything's hunky-dory. The murderer has been killed, and we're only left with the personality of Jenny, because obviously Rose is the murderer. And we then go back to the current day where we see as Malcolm has now only one personality left, and he seems hunky-dory, he seems calm and tranquil, not a vicious murderer like he is. We then see as the appeal ends up going in his case. They're like, we will stay off his execution, which was supposed to happen in 19 hours, and allow him to return to a state psych ward, so that he can live out his days rather than being, unrightfully killed due to his personality disorder. And we see, like I said, everything appears to be good. We see as he's getting transported. We see as Jenny, in his mind, is able to go to get her orange farm in Florida and all of that. And things appear to be good. So we see that as Jenny goes to start, in his mind, digging in some, beside this tree or something. She starts digging, and ultimately, someone comes. Timothy. Timothy was the murderer all along. Timothy did not die when the car blew up. He blew up the car and allowed Jenny to melt inside. And it shows the connection about how he murdered everyone, because Timothy was the one who did it all. Timothy suffocated Alice. Timothy was the reason why George got hit by a car, because George was trying to get to Timothy and to keep him away from this driving maniac. And everything essentially devolved to the point where Timothy was able to do most of the killing, and then Rose kind of finished it off. And so here we see as Timothy then kills Jenny. And we then see as his persona ultimately ends up taking over Malcolm, and Malcolm is left with only the killer now. Which he ends up doing is, we see his dog notice something's going on in the back. He's like, are you good? Malcolm ultimately ends up giving this poem, which he gave at the beginning of the story, and Ed has given once throughout. Ends up wrapping his handcuffs around his neck and choking him, and then gets the other guy in there as well who's driving. And that's where the movie ends, with the poem. Great movie. I love this movie because it really threw me for a loop, because I wasn't really expecting the end here. I knew it was probably something coming as identity. My dad had told me that it was about dissociative identity disorder. I was like, okay, there's probably some switch up. But I was expecting the killer to be who it seemed to be the entire time. With the foreshadowing, I thought it was Larry. And then with the foreshadowing with the blood on Rhodes' back, I was like, it's got to be Rhodes. But then we got the dissociative identity disorder thrown in here, and I was like, that's really cool that it was all in Malcolm's head. But then we solved the thing, and I was like, okay, this is good. Everything concludes, it has a happy ending. And then we get thrown this loop of Timothy actually being the killer, which is really cool. I was not expecting Timothy at all, because Timothy was just a quiet, calm kid. And also one thing I liked is it did do this twist, because I was not going to be very satisfied if it would have just went with a supernatural, the Native Americans ultimately ended up killing them, all the spirits, which would have been very disappointing for how quality of a movie this was and how interesting it had been throughout. But I was super satisfied with this movie. It's a great movie. Before I saw the twist of it being dissociative identity disorder, I would probably give it a 5 out of 10. But as it is now, I'd probably give it a nice solid 7 out of 10. It was a great movie. I really enjoyed it, and I'd highly recommend watching it for yourself, because in my reviews every time, there's always more merit in actually going to watch it for yourself. This is kind of something to lure you in and get you hooked on it, maybe, even though it does tell a lot of the story. But that's all it really was for Identity. That's all I really have for episode 194 of Shelf Review. So, thank you very much for watching.